Hello everyone, greetings from FICCI. Welcome to day 8 of the virtual school on IP. Today we will be conducting two sessions on two different topics. The first session is on IP and the fourth industrial revolution, followed by the second session which shall be on role of IPR in access to healthcare. I now welcome you all to day 8 session 1 of the virtual school on IP. Our speaker for this session is Mr. Rohan Rohatgi, who is the founder at RSR Legal Advocates, which specializes in intellectual property laws, media and entertainment laws, e-commerce laws, as well as general litigation and transactional matters. Mr. Rohatgi has been practicing for over 10 years in India and has handled cases relating to trademark infringement, copyright infringement, designs infringement, defamation, right to privacy, anti-suit injunctions, among others. He also advises clients on prosecution and enforcement of their intellectual property rights, as well as regulatory issues relating to e-commerce, as well as providing transactional support. Over the years, he has attended various domestic and international conferences, as well as delivered talks in conjunction with the Chambers of Commerce and the Intellectual Property Office to educate the police officials as well as university students about intellectual property laws. It is indeed an honor to have you with us in today's session, and we welcome you, sir. All queries related to the session shall be answered during the Q&A round at the end of the session. Participants may type their queries in the chat box. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Mr. Rohan Rohatgi and would request him to make his presentation on the topic today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa, for the introduction. And firstly, thank you so much to FICCI and SciPap for giving me the opportunity to present on this topic today. So the topic is a very interesting and a very non-conventional topic on intellectual property and the fourth industrial revolution. The next slide, please. So what we are dealing with here is what exactly is the industrial revolution, right? So industrial revolution basically refers to a period of transformation in the production of goods and services. And by that we mean what is the current standard right now. And by that revolution, the whole standard changes. It basically meant in the initial phases back then in the 18th and the 19th centuries, from a labor-intensive production to mechanizing those tasks to save on time and cost. That was what basically was the Industrial Revolution. Next slide, please. So till now, we have had the three industrial revolutions, and we are presently in the fourth. So the first industrial revolution was in the period from 1760 to 1840, where water and steam power to mechanize the production. Initially, you had cottage industries, which were manufacturing the products. During that period, due to water and steam power, production was mechanized. And this was a transitional to the mechanical industrial revolution. Next slide, please. So as an illustration, steam engines, cotton gin, telegraph, cement, modern roads, etc. were all outcomes of the first industrial revolution, as faster transportation and communication became important for industries. And that was one of the reasons for saving a lot of time, a lot of cost, and productivity went up notches. Thereafter came the second industrial revolution, which was from the period of 1870 to the 1950. Next slide, please. During this era, majorly electricity assisted in mass production of the goods. There were large machines working on electricity, conveyor belts, and assembly units, which marked a shift to more advanced factories. It was a transition from mechanical in the first industrial revolution to electric. Next slide, please. Like I said earlier, the automated assembly lines increased the production multifold. For instance, Henry Ford's contribution to the automobile industry revolutionized personal transportation as we know today, especially during that era in the United States of America. It's also very important to note that the first and the second industrial revolution were primarily uh, in the Western countries, uh, specifically Britain and the US. It was much later that the revolutions came also into the other countries, including India. Next slide, please. We will deal with India a few slides later. Then was the third industrial revolution, which was from the year 1960 to 2010, which is commonly known as the digital revolution. It was the onset of automation of a lot of tasks, use of technology to simplify work. So from mechanical in the first revolution to electric in the second, and now to the electronic or the digital revolution. So this was a mass shift in these nearly uh, 200 to 50 years. Next slide, please. So use of computers and electronics in offices and government departments brought newfound speed and efficiency in work, which is primarily the ITC model, where a lot of ICT was used to create better results, better delivery to the consumers, to the customers, to the citizens of those countries. Next slide, please. And now we come to the fourth industrial revolution, which is the topic for today. The fourth industrial revolution is started from sometime around 2010, 2011. It's basically fusion of different technologies from physical, digital to biological. There's an integration of electronic into physical, what we now know as decision making by electronics at times. It could be Internet of Things, it could be artificial intelligence, big data analytics, which blurs the line between men, machines, and intelligence. We will expand onto this going forward. Next slide, please. So, what are the drivers of change that are bringing the industrial revolution? Some of the technological breakthroughs have been big data, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and robotics, which are bringing transformative impact on the nature of the work. The demographic changes are also one of the drivers of change. The world's population is aging, putting pressure on the businesses, social institutions, and economies. The shortage of a human workforce is in a number of rapidly aging economies has necessitated such automation. Also, the UN projects that by 2050, the world's urban population will increase by nearly 72%. Rapidly growing cities have become drivers of a new industrial revolution. And the Smart Cities project by the government of India is also one of the drivers of the new industrial revolution, which we will talk in detail later. And lastly, there has been a power shift between the developed and the developing countries with a large working population, which will attract investments in becoming a driving force of the future. Now, onto the aspect of the fourth industrial revolution and IP. As you can see, a robust patent system has always been a bedrock for industrial growth, providing incentives to innovators to make novel and more effective systems in order to grow. So, industrial revolutions and the patent system work in tandem. A lot of our research, a lot of our innovations are protected through the patent system, which also have a huge social impact. Next slide, please. So we now talk about India, the pre-industrial era, where India was a leader in handicrafts and manufacturing of various goods. Like I said earlier, the industrialization came much later to India due to, as all of you know, a very complicated relationship with Britain. Now, Britain was, like I said, obviously the advent of the first and the second industrial revolution was primarily very focused on the Western countries, Britain being one of them. Now, the English industry started flourishing as cost of production went down significantly, and India began exporting raw materials and importing processed goods. Next slide, please. However, in the present day, due to a very strong IT and software industry since the turn of the century, which was the third industrial revolution, India, as all of you know, has been a pioneer in providing services and solutions. Due to the presence of a very robust IT framework in the private and the government sector, India can and has moved ahead quickly, and we will be able to make use of the fourth IT revolution by being a pioneer in providing smart business solutions, which we already are doing for the last so many years. Next slide, please. So, what is very interesting is India is only the fourth country in the world where the World Economic Forum opened its Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this is after US, China, and Japan. Now, the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution would work in collaboration with Niti Aayog to co design new policies and protocols for emerging technologies with an initial focus on artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and drones, among others. Interestingly, we already have a center which was established a few years back, which is now known as the Nascom Center for IoT and AI, which is basically a joint collaboration between the government of India through MITI and along with the governments of Karnataka, Haryana, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh, which is being looked into by NASCOM. So that is a very interesting development that's happened in India. There are various policies and regulations that the Indian government, the various ministries have come out with, which we will talk about later. Next slide, please. Now, in between all this comes the role of the IP offices. All of these new technological breakthroughs have really resulted in creation of intellectual property at an unparalleled pace. This has also caused IP offices throughout the world to innovate and implement mechanisms to handle workloads more efficiently. As most of you would know, especially those who are IP practitioners, in the last few years, there has been a huge advent of technology and better output, better results by the IP offices in India, and that is largely due to the technological background that we have, the ICT measures that the government took during the third revolution, which is now also helping us in the fourth revolution. Next slide, please. So the new technologies that have resulted in creation of IP like AI, big data, 3D printing have resulted in creation of IP in a manner that does not fit into the conventional practices known to us internationally and even domestically. Creation of IP by non human entities, use of unconventional source identifiers by goods and service providers. All of these pose challenges to the existing legal framework throughout the world. Now, interestingly, WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization, has been working on a lot of these AI based softwares for a long time. and so have a lot of the IP offices. Now, interestingly, uh, there's a conversation going on at WIPO on IP and AI, and it is still a very initial discussion. But what is interesting is WIPO has been using AI for a number of years now, and they have various classification based softwares for patents, for trademarks, for designs, and also now. So, for example, in trademark, there is a Vienna classification, and now it's become very interesting that you go on the website of WIPO, and when you go to the Vienna classification search, you load the image, and that will help you in actually telling you which classification of Vienna will this image fall in. Now, this is usually a tool followed at the back end by the IP offices, because when you're filing a trademark application, at this point of time, you're not asked to insert the Vienna classification. However, when you're doing an image search on the IP India office, you still need to, at times, put in the Vienna classification code. And for you to find that out, it's very interesting that you can download the image, upload it, get the classification, and then search on that basis. So it certainly does improve uh, the search analysis at the risk analysis stage for an individual or a company. Next slide, please. So the Industrial Property Office Business Solutions Division at WIPO has issued a white paper on the digital transformation of IP offices in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, this is a very interesting development which has happened in the last few years. WIPO has really been working on improving and also using these technologies for better results, for better backend services at be it the IP offices or be it the uh, law firms or the companies. So the white paper, next slide, please. So the white paper basically dealt with highlighting the need for IP offices to adopt digital transformation strategies to move from manual or procedural business processes to fully online, responsive, and modern processes that will enhance productivity and service delivery. It also recommended adopting modern IT technologies such as cloud computing, IoT, AI, and integrating these into the business processes to create new business models or to significantly enhance the existing service delivery. A few years back, the Indian Patent Office also uh, took out a tender to for a vendor who could assist in creating these IT technologies at the back end for them, including cloud computing, IoT, AI. That is still an ongoing process. However, I think that was the first time that the Indian IP office, specifically the patent office, dealt with transformation to the fourth industrial revolution, so to say. Next slide, please. So the IP offices, as the white paper suggested, need to adopt a very robust cloud computing infrastructure due to its benefit of fast and efficient service delivery, resilient infrastructure that protects against hardware failures, security of data, and cost effectiveness. So it will also, apart from these, one of the major roles that cloud computing would help in is uh, space. Today, because of network restrictions at the Indian IP office, you cannot upload, at least on the trademark side, a document which is more than 5 MB. And when you do, the system usually crashes. So moving to cloud computing would not only help in the hardware failures, the security of data, and cost effectiveness, but also enable the right holders to provide documentation at ease, because cloud space is much more easier to access than network space. Next slide, please. So, like I said earlier, the AI has really helped uh, in classification services, translation services, and search services, which can abundantly improve through use of AI in management of huge amount of data, and also has been done in various countries like Australia, the USPTO. All of these have been using AI to improve these, apart from WIPO. Like I mentioned earlier, in 2020, WIPO released the Vienna classification assistant that assists with Vienna classification of figurative elements of trademarks. Now, there are various offices, like apart from Australia, there is also the European Union, the US, Korea, Japan, which have really utilized AI in a very beneficial way to improve their backend. Next slide, please. And also on the translation services, what is very interesting, though not really related to IP, however, the Supreme Court of India is currently running a demo, and I think that is available on the website, where originally all the judgments are available in English. Now, through the AI software, they would the software would assist in translation of the judgment to a vernacular language, like, let's say, Bengali, Gujarati, Kannada, to for one to if someone wants to read the judgment in any vernacular language, the software will assist in converting the judgment from English to that language, and that would certainly be uh, uh, more authentic than doing it on a search providing agency. So, in terms of data analytics, they can be used to improve the IP office management by measuring the business processes and establishing performance indicators. Management can drill down into bottlenecks in the process and find out where efficiency or quality is below standard, and then design strategies to improve the performance, such as modifying business processes, training staff, or redeploying resources. Today, big data or data analytics is a very, very huge field. And there is so much of data being generated in all the activities that we partake, that it becomes important to analyze that data and see how that data can help such IP officers in more efficient ways of working. So these are, as I said earlier, these are all the suggestions in the white paper. Next slide, please. As per the white paper, to keep abreast of the technological advancements, regulatory frameworks need to be modernized. And in the electronic record keeping and transactions, electronic payment system, minimizing paperwork, and using sustainable technologies is really the way forward for IP offices. Now, vis-a-vis India, uh, the the IP offices have been modernized, and this is one of the projects that has been going on for a number of years now. And there has been a lot of modernization in terms of the technology. Most of the record keeping is now electronic. Now, till the time your documents are not on the e-register for trademarks or on the patent register, the the examiner will not till then really look into the document. The first thing they want is it should be there on the electronic record keeping. And we are more than 95% of the filings and the prosecution today is electronic. And due to the pandemic last year, I believe it probably might now be 100%. And the courts are also working on the same. And I think that really helps. This really helps in the analytics of the record keeping. certainly does. Electronic payment systems. I think today India is one of the leading electronic payment systems provider, and also at the back end of the front end. And systems like UPI and various other systems have really helped in transformation of and the modernization of the IP office. Majority of the payments are now since the filing is also electronic. Majority of the payments are also electronic. Paperwork has, though the paperwork has not really been minimized, but it has mostly been digitized. And For example, in 2017, uh, the new trademark rules were introduced, and that has totally changed the whole dynamic, where more than 70 forms were brought down to 8 forms. That so in a way, the paperwork has been minimized. Uh, in terms of using sustainable technologies, I believe a lot is going on in the back end, and soon we will see more changes in the IP offices. Next slide, please. So, what are the challenges of protecting non-traditional IP that we are facing today? Like mentioned earlier, the newer technologies mean the traditional IP frameworks are insufficient to cope up with the protection and enforcement of new age IP. What was Next slide, please. What was earlier a very clear concept in the conventional copyright and patent law has taken a huge hit. Now, one of the biggest hurdles that IP officers will soon face is to award the authorship and ownership of patents and copyrights to non-humans. And interestingly, the last year in the US, there is a appeal pending where the USPTO refused a patent since the invention was machine based. Now, though they can be the author, but can they be the owner? And since they are not a living person, can they also be an author? So the USPTO refused at the first instance the patent to the owner, but now that is the subject matter of appeal. It'll be interesting to note what really comes out, because that will totally transform the way other countries like India will look at these issues, which I believe will arise in the near future. Technology today is advanced enough that AI is capable of creating material which can be classified as work in copyright law. The question then arises is if laws are flexible enough to allow non humans to own copyrights. And certainly, there is a further challenge as to who might be permitted to manage and enforce such rights against other persons. Uh, can can due to machine learning, can that machine learning uh, go to a court and enforce, or go to a police station and enforce your right? Certainly not. You will still need a human to do that. However, here we're not talking about enforcement, but majorly about the authorship, ownership of works, as well as of ownership of patents. Though in terms of patent law, that is something which is now pending before the U.S. court. In terms of copyright, it's interesting that even though one could said to be an author, can they be an owner? And also, again, they might not meet the minimum criteria to be an author. So, in such situations, how does one deal with in the traditional IP landscape? These would have been very easy things to who's an author, who's the owner, who's the inventor. However, the technologies like AI have totally uh, changed the whole regulatory landscape. Next slide, please. So, in 2018, October 2018, a French trio of painters known as Obvious. Next slide. Yes, thank you. Programmed an AI to start with, and then they chose the 15,000 portraits to train it on. The resultant painting eventually fetched $430,000 at an auction. Now, this AI was used on an open source license by an artist called Robbie Barrett, who also uses it to make paintings. My apologies. In circumstances such as these, the lines between art and the artist blur. So the question that really will arise is the painting that really came out now, is the program the author, or uh, the artist who owned the license, he is the author? Various interesting questions that arise due to these technologies coming in. And I would say the fourth industrial revolution is really uh, changing the conventional ways of practice, the conventional ways of the IP laws. What we thought were set standards are totally changing with the advent of these technologies. Next slide, please. So there are, like I said, there are very significant questions to be answered about the nature, the authorship, and the ownership of such creations, and whether our laws are adept in solving the complex disputes arising out of these situations. This is only an instance where AI is working in tandem with the humans. With growing technology, we can imagine more independence and creativity available with AI. Uh, Now, even today in our homes, most of us have Alexa or Siri or any other kind of these programs. And these are primarily, what are these? These are all artificial intelligence based programs. They can read, they can listen, they can uh, to what you are directing them to, and based on what you say, the machine reads and plays what you want them to play. So that is a very interesting situation in terms of the industrial revolution. Like I said, again, smart cities, that is one of the programs under Digital India, is also primarily a component of the fourth industrial revolution. What they're doing is basically the whole city would work on technology, and all these technologies are based on AI, on big data, 3D printing, uh, even Bitcoin. Sorry, not Bitcoin, but the blockchain technology. And all these technologies are changing the way we execute our work, we run the cities, and even the government works. And as recent as a few weeks back, the government has come out with a draft of the blockchain policy. So it is interesting times uh, with these developments. And what is very interesting is when we talk about Digital India, it's not just a name. Uh, I would say the whole premise behind Digital India is primarily to to take the fourth industrial revolution to our cities, and there are various programs that are being run under that uh, Digital India. And like I mentioned earlier, the Nascom Center of Excellence on IoT and AI is primarily a component of Digital India. So, next slide, please. So, in terms of patenting in software, uh, now most of these technologies will be classified as software. Till date, many of the jurisdictions do not give patent rights over software, which is usually protected by copyright, as is also the case in India. I believe, apart from the US, majority of the countries are do not protect patent software, do not grant software patents. However, there has been a bit of change in India during the last year as well, where if you can show that the technology is in some way improving, and there is a relation to hardware, maybe that could be allowed. Now, with the softwares and the AI beginning to make very independent decisions and perform these tasks, challenges do lie in front of lawmakers to harmonize the same with patent law. Next slide, please. So, patenting at genomic and molecular level, traditionally these life sciences were restricted to isolation and study of the fundamental building blocks of life. But now that humans can actively edit and create the genome and cause it to further do specific tasks in fields of biomedicine, complicated questions of patentability are bound to arise, which laws and courts need to be equipped to handle. Next slide, please. Blockchain and decentralization. Now, this is a very, very interesting development. Like I mentioned earlier, the blockchain policy came out a few weeks back, the draft, and it's still awaiting public comments. The advent of the blockchain technology in matters like record keeping, currency, is already a major topic of discussion across various jurisdictions, which are trying to enforce sovereignty over decentralized technology. Some of the countries have already legislated on the interface of big data and emerging technologies with privacy, and will soon need to formulate answers to more complex technological advancements. Now, what is interesting is at the international level, there are various, at all forums of the UN and various other forums, there's a huge discussion going on uh, the usage of blockchain in the financial services market. There are various technologies which are now available, which really use blockchain to utilize it in their financial service projects. Uh, it was interesting is it is said that cryptocurrency is a subset of blockchain, and though at this point of time in India, there is no regulation vis-a-vis cryptocurrency, but there is a bill which is likely to be introduced in the forthcoming session of Parliament. So it will be interesting to note how really we go around these new technologies that are coming up with and the Industrial Revolution. Now, like I said, we already have a smart city policy projects which are going on as a subset of the Digital India program. There are various other very interesting technologies like the drones, which could also be said to be a part of the fourth industrial revolution. And they were recently the drone regulations 2.0, which are, I think, known as the Unmanned Aircraft System Rules 2020, were introduced. And it basically regulates how drones can be used, in what way can they be used. They can even be used for delivery of goods. So you would see in the near future companies like Amazon and Flipkart uh, really taking away all these. The gig economy might go with the advent of drone regulations. So in a way, uh, at times the industrial revolution, I think from the beginning, is becoming less labor oriented and more mechanized. And probably with the fourth industrial revolution, we might be decreasing the the load. I would not say the load, but maybe we could have a lot of restrictions on labor and employment going forward. So that is it from me. I think there are various other regulations that are in the works or already there. For example, the TRAI, which is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, already has or is working on various technologies for usage in telecom and broadcasting. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here, because at this point of time, the legislation is still not really dealing with a lot of these new technologies. Though there are various initiatives by even the governments, but I think it will take time for these to really uh, start showing the results. Some are, and some will take time. So even in India, 2018, the government formed a committee on AI, which was very interesting, and I think a few of those recommendations have now been implemented by the government. So So it'll be interesting. Let's wait and watch. In terms of IP, I think the two main components are how are these technologies used to manage and run the IP offices, and the second being how do you protect the the works and the inventions created by machines. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. That is it from me. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, I will be happy to answer those.
Thank you so much for such an insightful session, sir. Now I proceed to Q&A session. If anyone from the audience has any question, please type the same in the chat box and we'll put the same to the speaker. Sir, there is a question from a participant. Sir, the question is, when we talk about